What is up, fellow sickos? I'm Dan Favale coming at you with my co-host Grant Hughes. It's time for another round of We're Just Asking Questions. Hashtag, as Grant said, WJAX, WJAQ. You can find those on YouTube as we continue to build out the series. Grant, what's our question this week?
So the overarching question is, should the Memphis Grizzlies be done with Ja Morant? We're just asking questions. Just asking questions. Within this, though, I have several sub-questions. Would you like me to dive into those after a short introduction of why we're asking this question to begin with?
Yes, can you take us through why we're asking this question in the first place?
Yeah. If you have been under a rock, if you're listening to this podcast and are wondering why we're just asking this question, you've missed a few things. It's kind of all anybody's been talking about. The quick and dirty synopsis. Ja Morant kind of quiet quit in the second half of a game against the Lakers this past week. And head coach Tuomas Isalo challenged Morant's leadership after the loss. That's per Shams Charania. And also per Shams, Morant responded in an inappropriate manner and was suspended for one game by the Memphis Grizzlies. This has been kept mostly in-house, short of, or at least on the Grizzlies side, short of Morant having a couple of post-game interviews where he basically referred all questions back to the coaching staff, asked if he had his usual joy when playing basketball. He said no. So that's where we are. Have I missed anything major from the quick synopsis there? That's why we're asking.
The only thing I'll add is that if you look at the Pistons game, like I feel like there's been more quiet quitting than just the game that everyone's focusing on.
Sure, there have been some intimations that maybe this wasn't something that just happened at halftime of the Lakers game, where that second half was very conspicuous. Everybody picked up on it before the comments. But yeah, so maybe there's also some other evidence that the let's see, what would you call it? If the second half was quiet quitting, he was even more quietly quitting. Before that, there was some quitting going on, but it was a whisper level, maybe. I don't know.
And since coming back, he's not been setting the world on fire.
No, has not set the world on fire. Has not looked good. Hasn't looked good all season, and that's something to get into here, because one of the questions we need to ask before we answer, not that this is really about answers, should the Grizzlies be done with him, is how good is Ja Morant? Right? Because that affects your, as a franchise, tolerance for this kind of thing, that, your willingness to think about extensions, which the Memphis Grizzlies were not willing to think very hard about this past offseason, at least for him. They gave Jaren Jackson one. So the answer to how good is Ja Morant, so far very bad this season. That's a pretty straightforward one. 38% from the field, 14% from three. If you were doing all-star voting right now, he would not be even a fringe consideration. That's independent of what I think is fair to say is some crises of leadership. If you care about that type of thing, has not been a great leader for the Grizzlies to this point. Just to rewind it a touch, we're measuring this against, his best year was 21-22, right? That's the 27 points, almost 7 assists, 49% from the field, 7th in MVP voting, one most improved player that year. That's his only All-NBA nod. The only year he posted above average true shooting. Had a career high 58 dunks that year. That's relevant because his average shot distance tied to that was 10.1 feet. That has trended up steadily. He's up to a career high distance of 13.6 feet per shot this season. So athleticism diminishing, shooting was never there. It's much worse now. It is fair, Dan, to say that he is not what he was in that career best season and hasn't really been that close to it since, right? So then the sub-question to the sub-question is the All-NBA Ja coming back? And maybe that's where I'll throw it to you. What do you make of the decline? Is it a permanent downward trajectory? How do we evaluate a player like him in terms of because what we're trying to answer is he so good that you shut off the discussion of should we trade him? Should we move on somehow because you can't do better? Or is he in a level where it's I don't know. We'll get to the other factors, but just as far as him on the floor, where do you sit with where he's at and what that means for this bigger discussion we're having?
This feels like almost a perma decline to where this was someone who was and still can be super athletic, but it doesn't feel like he's broadened his game nearly enough. I mean, he's not really any better on defense, but specifically looking at offense, the shooting is a major concern. I think he's probably still an underrated passer, and to his credit, like the Grizzlies have a top 7 offense over the past half decade when he's on the court. So this is a clear difference maker. And I think when you look at this season, look at who he's playing around. Like, what are the skilled big men that he's supposed to be throwing the ball? Is it Jock Landale? Like, I don't. So does Zach Edey coming back eventually help him? Does Brandon Clark coming back eventually help him? And so I'm sympathetic to the idea of, well, what would Ja Morant look like with this team sort of at full strength? But then I'm kind of talking about those bigs, and Clark's dealt with injury issues. If you want bigs who could catch the ball or catch lobs, that's not what Zach Edey did well as a rookie. It's just more talent. So I don't know how much if I'm the Grizzlies, and to be fair, they've already made like their choice on this. Is you traded Desmond Bane, you renegotiated and extended Jaren Jackson Jr. We didn't even hear a whisper. This is the thing that stands out to me. Nikola Jokic doesn't sign an extension with the Denver Nuggets this past offseason. The chatter around the Nuggets was they offered it. He's not going to sign it because he's going to sign a longer deal next summer. You didn't even hear whispers of the Grizzlies offering the extension for which Ja Morant was eligible, or trying to negotiate with him, or the talk of, well, we're just going to get him next year when he can sign a longer deal. That's a red flag in itself. And I don't necessarily blame them for reaching this point, because it comes back to your initial question, which is, how good is Ja Morant still relative to the rest of the stars in the league? And I think at best what you could say is he needs to string together an entire season of looking closer to the player that we saw 3 years ago, or whatever it was, before you view him as, one, someone you would trade everything for, or two, someone you want to continue to build everything around. And we all know the baggage, injuries, whatever stuff happened off the court. I think sometimes people sensationalize the idea that they want to just believe he's a scumbag, which is just,
Sure.
I'm not here for that. But like, when he got suspended, that was the first time he was going to play in 7 consecutive games for March 2023. I think Fast Break Breakfast had that stat. And like, you couldn't even get to that milestone at that time without some sort of dramatics.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that aspect of it, I agree. Like the quickness with which some people want to just write him off as like a bad actor. I think what you can say definitively is he's made some really stupid decisions, which does tie to the leadership aspect of it, which does tie to how good is he. That's all baked in, because if availability matters, the like tone setting you're doing for the franchise matters. And again, it's not like you're a bad person. It's like, if you're making stupid choices, that's setting a bad tone as a leader for the team. But so I think actually what you led us to the next question I want to ask, which is we need to give him some benefit of the doubt. So go ahead. You're going to say something.
I don't know if this is going to step on the toes of what you're going to say, but if you were the Grizzlies and you've decided that you want to move forward with Ja Morant, is the entire idea that we're trying to find a player now, we need to be better than Ja Morant? Or is that player already Jaren Jackson Jr., who this year, by the way, and we've talked about this when we went through Peace or Panic with the Grizzlies, like Jaren Jackson Jr.'s role has changed compared to last year. Fewer paint touches, like fewer self-creation touches. I wouldn't call it necessarily a de-emphasis, but just the byproduct of putting the ball in Ja Morant's hands more. And so if you are going to run that type of an offense and you're the Grizzlies, do you need a player who is better than Ja Morant? And can Ja Morant play next to a player who's better than Ja Morant?
Well, this is another, I wish I had thought of that sub-question, is like, so if you are, like, what does that mean for your team construction going forward, right? If depending on where the Grizzlies are with Ja. I want to get back to that. What I want to make sure we do, to be fair, is hit the idea, is kind of go, we've talked from a Grizzlies perspective mostly, I think, is like, how good is he? Like, all that stuff. Is Ja Morant justified in being frustrated? Because he hasn't really given us a lot to go on, right? We're speculating. There's been some reporting. So let's kind of put things on his side and look at what possible sources he might have for being frustrated with what the coaching staff is doing, how he's being used. Maybe like to you, I think if anything, he should be frustrated by like, look at the team that's around me at the moment because we've got so many key injuries and you traded away Desmond Bane. So let's talk about role. Notably, he bristled at the total change in how the offense ran last year. This is all kind of like role touches, playing time. This is all going to be kind of a piece. First 5 years of his career, he was a super high usage pick and roll guy. Last year, career low. The Grizzlies stopped setting ball screens. Back to career high levels this year in terms of like he's gotten what he's wanted in terms of like as far as like what he is doing offensively. Tons of pick and rolls. Cade Cunningham and Trae Young, the only guys getting more picks set for them than Ja so far this year per possession. Touches, basically way back up to on the ball as much as anybody, short of like Jalen Brunson or last year Jalen Brunson because the Knicks have changed too. Tons of dribbles, back to where he was prior to the offensive change last year. Playing time, minutes are down, but he's never averaged 34 minutes a game, so to be around 30 isn't like a crazy change, and you cited the durability issues. And I wanted to bring up this comment from Thomas Isolo, the Grizzlies head coach, which goes to this point. And maybe this is where Ja is like, this is unsalvageable because it does seem like the Grizzlies under Isolo have a very specific philosophy about how guys should be played. He says, basketball is evolving and the demands on the intensity are higher and higher, and we're looking to also adapt to the times. I think what's often forgotten is the actual sub-pattern. It's to optimize results in the short, medium, and long term. Now, he acknowledges that maybe what you're sacrificing is chemistry by shuttling guys in and out a lot, by cutting minutes. Certain lineups just get fewer reps together. You're sacrificing, maybe there's some other variables you're not getting back. So it's a very measured but direct, not a response to Morant because this quote came from earlier, but it is a justification for how the Grizzlies are playing everybody, not just Ja. Like minutes are kind of down. So I don't know, maybe that's frustrating to him. I want to talk about does Ja not have enough clout? Like, does he not feel like he's being listened to?
Could we start with the minutes thing then really quickly?
Yeah, you go hit that.
If you're Ja Morant and you mentioned the durability issues, do you think that that's an actual core belief of what the Grizzlies are doing right now, or is it more a reaction to the person? Now, look at who can't stay healthy or can't stay available. Ja's had issues. Jaren Jackson Jr., I didn't think he was going to be ready to start the season this year. So I just wonder, have they looked at their best players and actively decided, no, we have to be run this way?
Maybe. To me, that quote and some of the other things you hear and read about Memphis and Isolo's philosophy is that I think my guess is they would have adopted this regardless of personnel. Like, I think they've decided that we just got to play guys less. We will expect them to play harder. And you know, whether that means more full court pressure, faster pace, just generally going harder for shorter spurts, I think they've decided is the way to optimize the game. Maybe that's going to be right, maybe that's wrong, but I do think that's just kind of a philosophy that they have. It does so happen that like because of their key guys' durability, maybe it makes more sense. But we talked about this off mic, and we'll step on maybe what will be a longer discussion at some point in the future. Is the going way harder for shorter stints actually a better way to preserve player health, or having them play longer stints and maybe not go like 110% all the time? Is that actually the way? So we don't know. So we're trying to find I guess what I'm trying to do is find justifications for Morant's frustration. And so what I'm kind of pointing to is, and to talk about clout, to talk about his contract, definitely the contract might be, the lack of extension might be like the blinking red light, like you said, of like, that's why he's pissed off. But because he was unhappy with the offense last year, they fired the assistant coach that brought it in, and they fired the head coach that implemented it. So he's still got clout. The playing time, sure, but be durable and maybe you play more. You can't complain about the touches, can't complain about the style of offense. I guess he could be upset by the lack of like healthy personnel around him, but that's kind of irrational because like, well, that's just, you know, that's not a choice that the team is making. Guys are hurt. What are you going to do? So I don't know. You could definitely find reasons for him to be justified in being frustrated. I don't know if those rise to the level of like you're the team's best player in theory and leader and like face, I guess, for lack of a better term, and you quit more or less like in an actual game on the floor where everybody saw it and you're not really taking accountability for it. Bad look, even if you want to be charitable and say he's got reasons to be upset. So then the question is trading him really an option? Next sub question. That's thorny, right? Because you've got a lot of like non-basketball things to consider with that.
Right. And with Memphis, I think it's easy for armchair GMs like ourselves to just sit here and start throwing out teams and packages. But I think there are two things to really focus on here. And that is one, Ja Morant means more to Memphis than just a basketball player. Like this was someone, if we were doing league pass rankings for individual players, how many years would he have finished in the top 5 for us, even with the injury risk being there?
Right.
He's
right.
going to put butts in
Often.
seats. He's the name around which it feels like this era was built, but it also kind of feels like they might be signaling they're going to move away from it. You also have to ask, does it make sense, though, to move him now when he's at the nadir of his value? There was the report, I think it's telltale in the reports from Sam Amick, from Jake Fisher. There was even the ESPN roundtable. Either the hypothetical packages being thrown out there, I think what ESPN said is they can hope to get something like the Nets did for Kyrie Irving, which really came out to be a first-round pick, and then whatever they turned Dorian Finney-Smith into, which was not. They didn't get first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith when they traded him to the Lakers. And then the team names that are, it feels like it's all speculation. It's not Team X is interested in Ja Morant. It's like, the Kings are stupid enough to throw a bunch of stuff at Memphis. That feels like the level of analysis. And if you're the Grizzlies, so my definitive answer would be, I'm not trading Ja Morant because he is at or close to the nadir of his value when you look at, if you can't trust him to be a leader in the locker room or respond to coaching criticism the right way, and then just the play on the court. I mean, when you look at players who have this season a 25 usage rate or higher, only Shaedon Sharpe, Jeremiah Fears, and Trey Mann have a lower points per shot attempt than Ja Morant. That's not we could talk about, think about what he is at his peak. How long ago was Ja Morant's peak? And I think that eventually opens up what we'll have to touch upon is how much of this is actually the Grizzlies' fault for maybe not reading the room and understanding we needed to go harder, faster around this guy because of the type of style he plays. But if you're the Grizzlies, you have to, let me be clear, you have to entertain it if a team comes and offers you a real package. But if you're the Grizzlies, you can't take the initiative and just even if Ja Morant says he wants out, which does he have the clout in your mind to even force his way out? But also you're not operating from any position of strength here at the moment.
No, I agree. So there's a lot to unpack here. One issue is, even if you believe from Memphis's perspective, and I don't know that it is because, like you said, his value is certainly not at its peak. It's much closer to having bottomed out. But let's say you're the Grizzlies and you believe that the best move for the franchise is to trade him now, even if you're not going to get much more than the Kyrie package, which I'd push back on a little bit because Kyrie was going to be a free agent. Ja's got 2 extra years on top of that on his deal.
Well, could I provide
which way does that cut?
Pushback? Well,
yeah,
right.
Sure.
Which way does that cut? But also, at the time, even though Kyrie did everything within his power off the court to submarine the Nets' title window, there was a proof of concept on the court for longer than Ja Morant has delivered. And so go ahead.
A very different type of, like, Kyrie Irving is above all skilled and Ja Morant is above all athletic. And so, like, if you're trying to project what kind of player type is going to age better, it was always Kyrie, right? Like that's got to be mentioned. But so I keep going on tangents of my own making. The issue is for Memphis, if you believe that the best possible move is to trade Ja Morant, you might still not be able to make that move because there have been whispers that like relocation is in the ether for the NBA, and New Orleans and Memphis are the top 2 names on that list. Memphis's lease on the FedEx Forum goes through 27-28, hasn't been renewed. So if you're the Grizzlies, you have to think about, is Ja Morant so important to the fan base here and our whole operation, that trading him means we're X% more likely to not have an NBA team here anymore. Like that's a factor. Now that's more of like a Memphis concern than ownership or whatever, because like you still get to be in charge of the team. You're just maybe in Las Vegas. That's another thing. Maybe you do this to submarine the operation so you get relocated. I don't know. But that's a variable that didn't exist for Brooklyn when they're trying to trade Kyrie. Didn't exist for the Heat when Jimmy Butler's making waves. Like that's a big thing to have to think about, is like there's potential for a Ja Morant trade because of all we talk about. And when we talk to Keith Parrish, it's just like Morant is the most popular Memphis athlete like in however many years. You trade that guy, you're 26th in attendance with him. What's it look like without him? Now, it sucks that has to be a consideration, but it does. I want to ask you though, like, do you buy into this idea? Because I just said 26th in attendance. That's terrible. And the Grizzlies have mostly been pretty good with Morant, right? Like they've had some deep playoff runs, some 50-win seasons.
And their home court is notoriously feels like one of the better home court
right.
advantages in
it's
the
like
NBA.
It's
not a slight
pretty live
the
in there.
fans.
Yeah, it's a raucous environment. But apparently that's just like a lot of people doing extra work because there's nobody there. I don't know. It never feels that way. My take on that is if you trade Ja Morant, sure, like that could hurt attendance. That could make you a less notable franchise. I would say, though, that what matters way more than that is just how good the team is, you know, in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. And if you're back to winning 50 games with somebody other than Ja, I don't think your attendance is going to be worse than 26th. I think fans will show up if your team is good. Like it's kind of like, I don't know, were the early 2000s Detroit Pistons like a ton of fun to watch when they're just grinding games out? Like their attendance was great. Like it doesn't matter what's causing the wins. If the wins are coming, I think fans show up and they'll embrace whatever this new identity post Ja is if it's successful. If you trade Ja and you're bad, then yeah, like obviously things will be worse for you as a franchise. But this is all a roundabout way of saying, yes, it's a concern that like you might get relocated if you trade Ja. But ultimately, you're going to do fine if the team is good, whether you have Ja or not. Like that's what I come back to. I think fans are fickle that way. It's not like, yeah, he's iconic and you can't imagine the franchise without him until you don't have him. And as long as it's good, you don't care. That's kind of where I land on it.
I would agree. I would make the decision independent of the relocation thing. And I also think that the Ja Morant factor is overblown when it comes to that discussion. Ja Morant is in his age 26 season. Do you think that relocation is going to be based off whether he's on the roster for his age? What is that, 28, 29 season? Mm-hmm. Especially when he's playing the way he is. Yeah. I don't buy that. And so and also you mentioned at the top, that's more of an ownership concern to where it's like, they're looking at it from the perspective of like, well, could we get, if they're going to sell the team, what could they get for it? Or if they're going to move the team, what do they stand to make? I think that's a decision that gets made independent of Ja Morant being there.
It should be.
What you said, I think, is more salient is just, what does it look like after Ja Morant? Because it's going to be bad for a while. So you need to have the stomach for maybe there'll be a drop in attendance or interest. Mm-hmm. But if you can build it back up soon enough, the Grizzlies fans will always be there.
Yeah.
How do you ensure you can get to that point? Because you can't trade Ja Morant for there'd be two variables here. That you just get the Godfather offer and it's easy. You have all these rebuilding tools. You're able to make trades. You're able just to draft and develop. Or do you actually just believe that trading Morant doesn't, as long as you're not actively taking back terrible contracts, you're not actually hurting your future as much because you've already put in motion, well, we're trying to not rebuild, but at least reorient ourselves somewhat independent of him when you look at what happened with the Desmond Bane trade. I never once believed, I did believe that the Desmond Bane trade was about flexibility, but I never viewed it as a vote of confidence of the organization putting in Ja Morant. It was never once that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you also have to consider the idea that like, well, if Ja Morant's gonna never play 7 straight games again, or or when he's on the court, he's this diminished version of himself. Like, what are we even doing? He can be as beloved as you want, but it's just like, addition by subtraction is too harsh. Like if you just erase Morant from the team and have that open salary slot or whatever, I don't know. Like odds are you'll use that on someone that's more durable, but the highs won't be as high because underlying all this is like when he's been healthy, which has been or available, which has been rare, the Grizzlies are just good. Like that is what happens. So it's hard to, maybe we should just kind of get into like potential packages or landing spots, which is like.
Can I ask one more question before we do
please,
that?
because that's the stuff I'm worst at. So,
I think it's the stuff that people enjoy hearing about the most, even if they want to. It's rage bait, I suppose. But it's a fascinating exercise because of how tough it is. But I wanted to ask, how much of this is on Ja Morant bears a ton of culpability here, but isn't this a level of the Grizzlies misreading the room on how aggressive they needed to be when Ja Morant was what we thought was an ascending star? I don't think you ever want to operate as if, oh, this player could be gone or out of his prime tomorrow. At the same time, when you're dealing with someone who's just like this physiological anomaly, it's the same thing with the Pelicans and Zion, where they spend so much time either trying to not even wait, but like tailor themselves to be as good as possible even when he wasn't playing. It's if you have someone like Ja with his athleticism, and you can't guarantee that he's going to successfully adapt. I think what favors him is that he is a really good passer. And so, like, as his athleticism continues to decline, he will still have utility. But if you're the Grizzlies, we made fun of, like, their wing choices. But the idea that, like, Zaire Williams at one point was supposed to be, like, this big deal for them, and I missed on Zaire Williams, too. I want to be clear. Them never really going full bore and, like, paying Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant, and Desmond Bane for a little bit isn't full bore. That's not what full bore is. And so they, I think, bear a ton of blame here, too. To one, you also set the precedent that Ja Morant can mope the way that he does or thinks that he has the level of agency and clout within the organization. That was clearly a mistake. I've seen a lot of kind of the defenses of what he said, like, oh, like the tone of his comments are like, this is kind of always the same. That's a problem. That's not a defense. And so
he does this all the time. That's not that you're not making a good argument.
You've enabled this to an extent, and I'd be saying the same thing if Ja Morant was considered a top 10 player in the NBA right now. I think that's where our front office is supposed to come into play, is that you are supposed to figure out a way to integrate these superstars. Yeah, they're going to get special treatment, but you can't let it run amok to the point where these types of comments or these suspensions are just they always loom. That's not an okay status quo. So
no.
I just don't think the Grizzlies are being blamed enough for, and forget about the off-court stuff for a moment. The on-court stuff of I love Cedric Cowherd is amazing, and we talked about him in our Peace or Panic segment. Everybody go check it out. But like, what was that Desmond Bane trade actually signaling? If we were to compliment them, it's all right. They recognize that they weren't good enough as currently constructed to win it all.
Which we did. Like, I think we made that point. That was an acknowledgement that this big three is not good enough.
Right. But why was, like, it was we're going to parlay this into, like, a very future-focused package rather than you didn't go out and try and find a way to upgrade the big three. What you did was, I don't even know what the Grizzlies are on, in theory, one of the most, if you leave the roster as is, they're on one of the most confusing timelines in the entire league.
Yeah. No, I think it's fair to blame management, ownership, whatever, for all the reasons you said. I do think, though, it's easy for us, and I'll just say me to leave you out of it, but like to look at a player like Morant and say, "Whew, going to be a short prime." Like guys like this that depend on athleticism, they don't last long, especially if you can't shoot, which he never really has. Even that All NBA season was like 34% from three on like volume. So easy from outside. I think if you're close to the situation and like say you drafted Ja Morant or say whatever, it's way harder to be like, we got to go for it now because this guy's gonna fall apart tomorrow. Like it's just like, because you don't want to believe that. You want to think we got our guy. He's gonna be good for 10 years. He'll improve, and it's just easier to be like, well, I hope what I want and what I hope for are like the same things. Which is to say, Ja stays this good or continues to get better all the way through his 20s, we're set. Which is kind of how everybody was talking about the Grizzlies for a good chunk of time there. Of like, well, if you're talking young cores and like who's got the best 5-year time horizon, there was a minute there where Memphis was very much at the top of that discussion, and it's because we all thought in the same way that I think management tends to do more often, which is like, we're not gonna forecast or plan for the worst possible thing, which is Ja Morant's not going to be very good for much longer. Like you just like that's so hard to do, I think, from a close up, like skin in the game stance. And it's very easy for us far away to be like, yeah, this guy's falling off.
But there's also smaller gestures they could have made, like not needing to use picks to dump salary to lower the
they fucked up a million. Like the transaction tree we've talked about for years of just like you turned X into Y, and it's just like
it always
how is Y
like,
10% of X all of a sudden?
It always felt like half or 3/4 measures is what I mean.
Over and over.
Like the Marcus Smart trade is probably the perfect example. It's where it was like that's kind of interesting, but the idea that he was that's your big swing.
Yeah.
And so, you're right. You probably, and you shouldn't have to forecast that Ja Morant would end up here. At the same time, even if you didn't think he would, don't front offices just need to operate with more urgency in general now? We've had 7 straight different NBA champions, and even windows that we thought were going to be open for a really long time. I mean, the Celtics are an anomaly, and even theirs kind of came crashing to a point that no one was expecting with the Jason Tatum injury. Look at the Pacers. Look what happened to the Nets. Whereas, okay, those stars were older, but you thought there was going to be 2 to 3 years of inevitability. They didn't even get to 2. So getting 2 trades, are there any – I think we need to blow through the cliche teams are the ones that are most mentioned. The Atlanta – Ja Morant, Trae Young, we're just throwing out structures. We're not going to get into nitty-gritty. The Trae Young for Ja Morant challenge trade does absolutely nothing for me. And if I had to pick a side that should be less likely to do it, I think it's Atlanta.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know that. I mean, at the moment, Trae Young, one, he's injured, but 2, I think he's still just the better player. So from Atlanta's perspective, I don't know why. Like Ja and Dyson Daniels is a rough combo. You need so much shooting around those two, which maybe Atlanta has, in theory. But yeah, I don't love it for either side. I guess maybe you'd have to like it more from Memphis's side, but then you just like, well, what are we going to pay Trae Young? He can just leave anyway, so that makes that one complicated. But kudos to you, because that's not one of the usual suspects that got tossed out right away in the Morant speculation.
The other 2 usual suspects, let's get one out of the way really quickly. I despise the idea, and this has nothing to do with Ja Morant as a person, but like Ja Morant in Houston makes absolutely no sense, and I cannot stress that enough. As a playmaker, sure, but that team is, even if they get away from dual big lineups, they're hard up for spacing. Ja Morant, Amen Thompson, Alperen, like that's just, no, that doesn't do it for me.
The spacing and then the specific impact on Thompson, which is like, not very different players, obviously, but like if you're getting more, if Morant's on the team, he's on the ball a lot because he has 0 off-ball value, at least especially lately. And what does that mean you're diminishing who we think, Şengün's great, but like Thompson's still the guy, right? Like if he becomes the best version of himself, Şengün's been really good, but you see what I'm getting at is like you're compromising Thompson's growth, I think, definitively, because he's just off the ball a lot more. Don't like it.
I find it funny that the Kings continue to be mentioned. It's like, well, maybe they would do something stupid. They have too many guards to think that. I know none of them are actual point guards at this point. I would say if I'm Memphis, I don't hate the idea of a Ja Morant like Sabonis trade structure. Sabonis and Jaren Jackson Jr. together. I know you have Zach Edey there already, but like
but
Sabonis
you can't plan around Zach Edey. You're not like making.
What do you think? I think when Sacramento's mentioned, they want to pair Ja with Sabonis, and I just would view that as almost looking at the point where Ja Morant is at in his career. It seems like a lower end, or at least a riskier version of let's play De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis together, and like we have more evidence that Fox was doing more stuff off the ball better than Ja Morant, and like the defense would be worse. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, and just like I mean, it is. You do have to mention the Kings because, like, if you're in the Russell Westbrook business, you're by definition in the anything business. So, like,
this is an aside. Did you hear Russell Westbrook say that he opted out of his contract because the Nuggets told him to? They didn't want him. Yeah. I wonder why the Lakers didn't just try that rather than having to trade him to Utah.
That's all it takes to get off that money? Yeah, pretty good. I do like Sabonis and Jackson because Jackson does cover up for the two core deficiencies, which are rim protection and spacing. And you could play them together because Jackson is fine out in space. Yeah,
And
that
contrary
makes a
to
lot
how
of
you
sense.
feel about it, both of them do space the floor. Technically, I know you're iffy on the Sabonis front.
Contrary to how I feel about facts.
Now, but you know what the problem is there? Is if you're the Grizzlies, are you the team that is having to give up picks in that situation? Or do you think the Kings view it from a proposition of, well, Ja Morant's peak might be higher, and his contract is technically shorter, so it gives them an out from a mega salary sooner?
Yeah, I mean, Sabonis is pretty beloved in ways similar to Ja, I think. I'm trying to decide which fan base would be more upset by that. If you just called it a challenge trade, like a straight up 1-for-1, I don't even know if the money works, but it's actually probably pretty close. I mean, the Kings already don't have anyone that's not a guard. So just like I don't know what that roster is like. Max Renaud starting at center all of a sudden, and Ja is out there with like Levine and DeRozan and Russ, and that, like, I just don't know what you're doing there. Yeah, I don't know.
I would say it makes less sense for the Kings, but
Oh yeah,
I
you could though, like, devil's advocate. If you're the Kings, you can be like, look at this. We got the most exciting player in the league. Just wait. Now that he's happy, he's gonna be. You thought All NBA third team or whatever it was something 5 years ago. Get ready. Like you could definitely brand yourself around him. Whether that would actually amount to anything like team success wise is an open question, but that's the case for it. But you're also giving up a player that's like Sabonis is every Kings fan's favorite guy probably still. So I don't know.
I think the Kings fans would react. I don't know. Let us know in the comments which fan base would hate that trade more. I'm assuming neither of them will like it.
No.
What about Minnesota's been mentioned? They don't have a first round pick to trade. And so if you're Memphis, I'm assuming, I guess do you even want Rob Dillingham? What do you want from Minnesota as part of that deal?
Well, you've got to, I mean, Minnesota's going to have to peel off some good players to make that work. And I don't know.
Is like it Nas and what? I mean, you throw Terrence Shannon Jr. there, he hasn't had the cleanest start to
Does
the
that
year.
get you? That gets you close, maybe? Like,
no,
is McDaniels in the trade? Like, if you give up McDaniels, I think just like you've really fundamentally changed your team as the Wolves, and I don't know if it's
at this
better.
point too. It's so then Anthony Edwards is just going to guard the best player every single night. He's been doing more of that, but you don't want him to do all of that.
And just the Ja Edwards pairing, like what's that look like? Certainly, the ball is out of Edwards' hands quite a bit more, which, like, I think one of the things we've thought was wrong with the Wolves is like Edwards has way too much playmaking responsibility. Can you get a point guard? So if just from that perspective, it's like, well, we checked that box, but somehow I don't love the fit, and I'm not sure why.
I think this is more of a fit thing than about Ja's talent. Just looking at the Rudy Gobert of it all, and also, what does it mean for Julius? Like a defense of Ja Morant and Julius Randle? What is that?
Yeah.
The Wolves have struggled enough on defense. I think my hot take would be that Minnesota would be worse if you did something like Naz Reid and Dante DiVincenzo for Ja Morant.
You'd love to know what version of Morant you're getting, but we spent a lot of time here talking about how like that All NBA version ain't coming back. So yeah, I think you might be right on that front. It's just like you can't assume you're getting All-Star Ja Morant.
And is that even a package Memphis could, even if you're getting Rob Dillingham or a first-round pick swap, is that a package that you can sell to ownership, to the fan base? It's because I'd be very curious what they got for Desmond Bane. Do you remember you and I talked about what's really awkward is that if the Hawks put Trae Young on the market, would they get as much for him as the Grizzlies? It only takes one suitor, but would they get as much for him as Desmond Bane? Aren't we kind of at the point where you could ask the same question about Ja Morant? Of all the teams we've mentioned, some of them don't have the assets, but I'll name some other teams here too that could get in on it. A lot of people have cited Miami. Khalil Ware and Jaren Jackson Jr. could be interesting. They have some contracts to maybe you're getting Jaime Jaquez out of that to make it work. But like, is Miami with I think they have 2 tradable first-round picks or whatever. Like, are they coming in with 2 first-round picks and Khalil Ware and salary for Ja Morant?
I mean, well, if Miami wasn't running the Noah LaRoche offense that Ja Morant hated so much, they might be more willing to entertain that option. But some of the packages we're throwing out are like That's worse than the Kyrie return. And we kind of got to the idea of like, well, it's kind of different because of the athleticism decline and all that kind of stuff. But
if we didn't really. But so if you're Memphis and you're trading Ja Morant, are you want more of a picks and prospects package, or is it like a Naz Reid, Dante DiVincenzo? I'm not saying that's all it needs to be, but your team probably like I don't know who's running your offense. You're hoping Scottie Pippen is healthy. You do have Cam Spencer's having a pretty good year. Ty Jerome once he's healthy, but. Yeah. What are you prioritizing in a Ja Morant?
I sort of think if you're trading Ja Morant, it's the second step in the maybe it won't be a 3-step process because step 3 would be trading Jackson. I think you could just hold on to him because he'll fit in like most constructions you want to pursue. I think it needs to be more of a picks and prospects thing because if you're trading Morant, you're acknowledging, okay, we tried it with this group. We moved Bane. Let's move him. Like, are they a play-in team at the moment? Like, who are you swapping in there that elevates you to like the top 4 in the West, which should probably be the goal if you're going for like, let's get someone in to help now. So I think it is a picks and prospects move, which would be in keeping with the Bane trade. Like that's what you did with the Bane trade. You got optionality, flexibility, cost control, young players, all that stuff. Why would you? It would feel kind of disjointed if you prioritized. Let's get someone in we think is better than Ja Morant today to build the team. Like, I don't know how that works.
Well, there's a twofold question here. Is one, I don't love the fit, but like if you could just get him for the 2032 first-round pick and salary, eventually we're able to get there. Does Milwaukee have any interest in bringing in Ja Morant or is it just Ryan Rollins is better? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Fit-wise, it's probably easier.
Are you?
But
I hate the Giannis Ja fit. Don't you?
I don't love it.
Like.
But here's the other side of that. You're talking about how hard would it be to upgrade from Ja Morant. If you're the Grizzlies, what if this offseason, or maybe it's by the trade deadline, but Giannis is balling. He'd probably win MVP, I think, if the season ended today. Although he wants out of Milwaukee. Milwaukee doesn't control its own first-round pick again until 2032, whatever it is. And you do Ja Morant, all these picks, and like anyone who's not Cedric Howard and Jaren Jackson Jr., is that like a move, or is that too?
You need every possible. If you're like, I
I'm
guess at that point Morant's like matching salary, like right, like at that point
I
from the Bucks' Milwaukee
perspective. Viewing him as well. Yeah, we'll take a flyer on someone who will put butts in seats since we don't have our own, and we're entering this post Giannis phase.
Maybe like this will tide us over for a year or two, and what we really wanted was the picks so we can properly rebuild. But this might be okay for a minute. Like, sure, and the Ja Turner fit is fine. Like that's pretty close to the Jaren Jackson fit that was effective. I guess I just this is really hard. Like this is why he's probably not getting traded because there's just like I don't see the destination. Like the team that needs him. Desperately and was willing to give up stuff to get him.
He could play off Kyrie, but that's just right now. He's like you almost need Kyrie for Ja Morant to make sense on Dallas, and at that point, it defeats the purpose.
There was probably a time where we would have mentioned Orlando, and I just don't think that's remotely realistic now.
Reunite John Desmond Bane.
Yeah, it worked. Do you have any other teams before we put a bow on this?
Some people mentioned Toronto. I hate that fit.
What's that, like Barrett and Quickly or something coming
back? They have
the
money, yeah. And it's just with him, with Scotty Barnes, I don't love. And I don't think you could also look at, are there organizations that might buy medium on him and think they could reboot his value, or a team that's not good now but thinks it might make the leap soon? Washington's not going to go after Ja Morant. I don't think Brooklyn, even with its next year's first-round pick going to Houston, I don't think they would be in on Ja Morant. And that's what I think is tough and why we're at this point where we agree that I don't trust Memphis's vision, right? Like they just seem there's a duality to what they're trying to do that I don't think is going to work. But I don't believe that trading Ja Morant, unless you believe that he is so much of a malcontent behind the scenes that he is torpedoing development, the locker room, all of this, I just don't know why you would move him now. At the same time, I recognize that there is an awkwardness because to me, this is just me reading between the lines, you made it very clear over the offseason that he is not necessarily priority number one. I don't think that even if they were trying to restructure themselves, like to say, oh, we're not trying to blow it up, we're just trying to recalibrate our timeline. it felt more like an investment in Jaren Jackson Jr. as a mainstay than Ja Morant is a mainstay.
I think the last thing I'd say is what you're talking about is a little bit of a chicken or egg thing. Is it like, is Ja Morant playing this way and acting this way because he did not get a commitment in form of an extension? Or did the Grizzlies not offer an extension because they had a pretty good idea that Ja Morant was going to play this way and act this way? You know, so like we're juggling the blame, but like I do think from the Grizzlies' perspective, I wouldn't have extended him either. Right? Like, so I don't know, like who's actually.
Is it even that question? Because I'm with you that I wouldn't have extended him, but if you were actually invested in Ja Morant, the only reason to actually not offer or talk about the extension, again, to me, is because you're afraid he's going to sign it. Because
right.
Isn't that the whole? It's like it's kind of a formality, but you do it anyway. And the fact that they didn't leads me to believe that they were afraid, had they offered it to him, that he would have put pen to paper on the spot.
And we're saying that's the right decision. They were right to be afraid,
yes.
Right? Like, so I don't know what that.
It doesn't have to mean that this is over. Maybe this situation resolves itself. But my closing thought on this would be, we do kind of know how this is going to end. I would be fairly shocked if this is. Like Ja Morant is in Memphis for another 2 seasons. I don't know what's going to become of this season, but we've seen this movie before. A lot of this does feel like it's out of the team and superstar depart typical script.
Yep.
I don't see how that ending comes about though.
Right. Well, we're just asking questions.
We're just asking questions.
Didn't provide any answers.
Do you want to take us out of here?
You just asked me a question. Good way to keep with the theme. Thanks everybody for watching, for listening. Let us know what you think. This is, if ever there was a time to comment and get in on the discussion, it's when we just ask questions, because you can provide us with answers. Do that on Discord. Link for that in YouTube and podcast description. Do that here in the comments on YouTube. I don't know. Write us a snail mail letter if you want. We don't have an address for that. Just
Owl post, whichever you want to use.
However you want to. Shouts, Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.